welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to help trauma therapists be their incredible selves, to be human, to be real, not just a clinician. I'm a big believer in who we are is more important than what we know. And this requires cultivating authenticity, genuineness, and vulnerability, and that requires intention. You can learn more about my courses and workshops by going to thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. Let's get started. All right, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the podcast. I'm very excited to have back Jenn Turner. Jenn, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Welcome back. You're very welcome. So Jenn has had the honor of working with survivors of trauma for all of her career. Along with working in private practice as a trauma-informed therapist, she is the co-director of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, where she works to oversee training and supports the development of body-first interventions for healing from trauma. She also leads trainings in trauma-centered, trauma-sensitive yoga throughout the U.S., provides consultation to organizations on how to become more trauma-informed at all levels. All right. And you joined me back on episode 512. So we'll have that linked up at the show notes page. Welcome back.
Thank you.
So before we get going here, remind our listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently.
Yes. So I am originally, very proudly, from a small island up the coast of Maine, and which created quite the unique beginning to my existence. And now I'm living outside of the Boston area. And that's kind of the hub of where the Center for Trauma and Embodiment is based as well. I have a small private practice in addition to that work.
Well, I have to ask, why or how was living there uniquely impactful?
So many ways. One of the ways that I think about a lot these days is when you live, or at least for me, in living on a small island, there is a certain irreverence that you end up sort of internalizing because you kind of make your own way. I grew up in a place where there wasn't really law. The nearest police station was 45 minutes away. People really relied on kind of negotiating things as a community, but also allowing a lot of spaciousness to live and let live. That's kind of a Maine-ish way of being, I would say. And so for me, there's a lot of like free thinking. I think that has come from that. And stepping outside of the systems that we might operate in and work in and practice therapy in, which is something I think so much about these days, and contemplating, wondering if it's serving us, how do we actually want to do it? What is the best way as opposed to the way we've been taught? All of these kinds of things were really embedded in my youth and the ways that the community functioned.
What was the island called?
It's called Deer Isle. It is connected by a bridge. So it's not like a ferry kind of island. But my ancestors, my grandparents, great-grandparents grew up on an island that was 6 miles off the coast of that island. So there's just this like energy in my sort of line around making your own way.
Wow, really interesting. I'm glad I asked.
Yeah.
So what have you been doing since we last talked? And before you answer that, give our listeners who maybe didn't touch base with that episode 512, give us a synopsis of what you do.
Great. Yes. So at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, we work to develop like body first and really body based care models for trauma recovery and really focusing on complex trauma recovery. And so we're looking at, the impacts of trauma when it's happened over the span of time, when it's happened sometimes starting in childhood, all of these sorts of things, and then really creating care models that are designed specifically for that community. So we have a yoga program, which we've been doing for 21 years now. Research, direct care, training around that. The same thing is true of our newer program, weightlifting, which is about 5 years old now. So we have a trauma-informed weightlifting program, kind of following that same trajectory of pulling in from research, writing about it, direct care, feedback, and then training, so that we're kind of developing these models alongside other people putting them into practice and getting that reciprocal feedback. And then our newest program is called Rescripted, which is a theater-based program, which is very heavily focused on embodiment and play for adolescents and young adults.
So when you say developing care models, is that what you mean by the yoga, by the weightlifting, and that other?
Yeah. So those are really, we're looking at them through the lens of clinical care models that are adjunctive treatment. So typically things like yoga or weightlifting or theater even have been, when we look at therapy or therapeutic care, are sort of like recreational therapy as opposed to clinical interventions. For us, it's been really curious to think about and to do the work of, can we move about it? Can we lift weights about it for it to have meaning? Do we always have to talk about it in order for it to have meaning? Or can we do something with our bodies and like full stop? That is the processing. And so that's kind of been one of the questions that we've been toiling with over the years. And yeah.
Talk a little more about, if you would, the weightlifting program. How did that come about?
So the weightlifting program came out of a relationship with a colleague who was doing weightlifting in her own work, but as well as therapeutic work as a yoga practitioner, and started to see the benefits in, again, as it often is, right, reflected in her own body and her own work. Started to hear stories of other colleagues or people, even clients, that were going to the gym and finding these therapeutic benefits and wanting to quantify and understand that. So Mariah Rooney and Candice Lager are the co-directors of that program. The two of them collectively come from a clinical background. Mariah does, and Candice comes from weightlifting trainer background. And the two of them have really been collaborating around, one, how to make just a general gym space. So let's say you go into Planet Fitness, how does that become more trauma informed? But then what does it look like to also do it as a clinical intervention in a residential school or a therapeutic school or program where folks are seeking to recover and heal, and how to use that relationship with your trainer to begin to explore expanding your window of tolerance, or what is it like to choose to add a little bit of stress to your body through heavy weights? And then how do you negotiate that relationally with yourself and with another person, which is your provider? So,
okay, how if you go into a Planet Fitness, how do you make that more trauma informed? What does that look like?
I mean, I would say if they were here, they could do a better job of really going for this. But because I don't tend to spend a lot of time at Planet Fitness, but I do know that there's everything from the way that the layout, how things are certain done in terms of the weightlifting space, who feels welcome where. But that would be probably a conversation more for them, as I think I've been in a Planet Fitness a few times.
Okay. Well, in terms of as a clinical intervention, what does that look like? I mean, I could think of how, and I'm sure our listeners could think of how that could possibly benefit you. I mean, just getting that stress out, Right.
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's about building trust. It's about doing things within your body that you weren't sure that you could do. It's about, if you have the feeling, I don't know if you've ever done like heavy weightlifting or whatnot, but that feeling that happens is often a lot of interoceptive stimuli, right? Your heart is racing, your breath is increasing while you're bearing the weight of something. That is, in a lot of ways, is in fact reminiscent of a traumatic experience. And we're not looking to do exposure, but we are looking to help people expand that capacity to tolerate kind of a stress response in their body, which is to some degree what happens when we pile on weights on our body. In terms of clinical, that's something that's continuing to unfold as we do this work of what it looks like. But oftentimes, right, there's a processing component that happens, whether it's live time, if the trainer happens to be your therapist, but typically it is working in conjunction with, and doing it in a really power sharing way. So one of the things we've been focusing on, if we zoom out of specific programs, is so much around the relationship between provider and client or participant or whatever we want to call folks who are seeking service, and thinking about collaboration. A lot of times we're taught as trainers, as therapists, as physical therapists, yoga teachers, that we should come in and our clients should come in and have really concrete goals that we're working toward. Typically, that happens, one, outside of the realm of treatment. So someone comes into treatment and is like, here's what I want to work on, but you haven't even established a relationship together, or you haven't taken the 4 weeks to 3 months to drop into that relational and sort of embodied experience to then create those goals together, right? So it becomes a thing of an idea rather than something that actually comes out of the soil that you're sort of growing this work in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're thinking a lot about, what does collaboration look like? How do we break down some of the barriers that we're taught are boundaries that actually end up with us as providers gaslighting our clients or undermining the therapeutic relationship, so that we can really have an equitable power sharing dynamic where we're guiding. Sometimes we're listening, sometimes a client is guiding, and it's really reciprocal. To me, without that sort of foundational relationship, the work is secondary to that. The work is less meaningful if we don't have it within the context of that relationship.
All right, let's just pause here for a second to thank our sponsors. All right, we are back. So are you saying or suggesting that kind of inherent within the client, clinician, therapist dynamic, there is inherently an imbalance there, gaslighting? Say more about that.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about this year. Because yes, I think there's an inherent power imbalance that happens. And I think that part of at least my training, which I felt like was incredibly trauma-informed in a lot of ways as a therapist and still, was the expectation that I was supposed to come into the relationship knowing things. The client didn't know things, and then I impart that wisdom or that knowledge. What I feel like happens in that is a real miss relationally, is a real miss between, one, not having the chance to really get curious about the knowing that our clients come in with. Also, sometimes that I think encourages or sets up bypass where our clients rely on us rather than a self-reliance that can really happen when we get curious with our clients. A lot of times clients will come to me, or when I'm working with my interns that I get the opportunity to supervise, is they'll sort of feel like, well, if I don't have answers or I don't know how to heal or the path to that, then like, what the hell am I doing here? It's like, right, I know. And, we get to actually hold it. Of course, we have expertise in knowing, but the knowing that clients have about their own embodied experience, their own lived experience, they may not have been given the opportunity to value that, but it's there. And so how do we get to shift into that sort of relationship where, a lot of times I'll have this exchange with clients where it's like, hey, Jen, what do you think I should do about this? And it's like, I actually have no idea. There's a number of things. I'm actually curious about what you're going to do or what your instincts are, or, and so when I'm talking about the gaslighting piece, sort of adjacent to this conversation, it's a little bit in my mind around the fourth wall of therapy, right? So, and I think can happen in any sort of professional relationship, helping relationship. We learn that we want to have boundaries. Absolutely, right? They help us to establish safety and all of the things that we need in order to create a healthy relationship, a working relationship. And what are ways, I wonder about, that when we, in the name of boundaries, we gaslight our clients. For example, one thing I've observed a lot is that survivors of complex trauma typically, not always universally, but have a capacity to really read like and tune into my mood. So if I'm off, if I'm frustrated, if I'm exhausted, it's like, what's wrong with you, Jen? If there's the courage enough even to name it, right? Or the safety to name it. Are you okay? Are you mad at me? And what I think we find is that because we want to be good clinicians and good caregivers, because maybe we feel guilty if we're frustrated or annoyed with our clients, we're like, oh, no, it's not you. It's not. Or sometimes we've even been taught to say like, well, what's coming up for you? As opposed to actually honoring what someone is picking up on in the room, which oftentimes is real. And that to me is such a gem of when we think about working in that therapeutic relationship. If we're helping people to kind of have a little petri dish to then go into the world and have relationships, if we're gaslighting our clients and saying, oh, no, what you're picking up on isn't real, as opposed to actually, yeah, I am really frustrated. And I'm going to break down that fourth wall and we're going to talk about it. And I'm going to be vulnerable because I'm imperfect. And then and then what is it like to be in that space together? To me, that is, that's where the work is in those moments. And it's scary. Yeah.
Right. I so agree with you. And this topic is so exciting to me. And there's so many things. My little brain is just lighting up here. The first thing that I want to touch upon is the inherent power dynamic. It's built into, right, the relationship, right? The client is going to the therapist who apparently has all this knowledge and these degrees and this office and everything. And furthermore, that is, as everyone knows, I mean, that's people go to school to learn how to, impart, yes, to help, but to impart this knowledge. I mean, the whole idea of helping, why is someone becoming a therapist in the first place? Oftentimes that slips under the radar. Well, I want to help people. Well, you keep digging and digging and digging, and oftentimes there's trauma in there. And like for myself, I wanted to help people, like so many people. I didn't realize the degree to which my own trauma experience drove that need, want, desire to help. And of course, it's all coming from a very genuine place, but that really dictates how you show up in the room, And it took me a while to realize that. I remember the first supervisor I had, I was like, I walked in there, I was like so frustrated. And she was like, Guy, what's going on? I was like, they're not listening to me. Like the client, right? They're not listening. And she said something, I'll never forget it. She looked at me and said, why the hell do you think they need to listen to you?
Yes, that's right.
I was like, what?
Well, that's like, I had a great experience this year with one of the interns who was like, I really have a hard time with people who lie to me. I was like, I think you should really pause and think about how that might be a challenge in this role for you, because clients will lie to you all the time. And why do you feel entitled to hear the truth from them? And why do you feel entitled for their trust? You haven't earned it. And that's another thing, right? It's like, we have the office, we have the degree. It's like, okay, trust me. We all know at the hands of lots of different people who are supposed to trust, shitty things happen. And so why do we feel like folks are, should trust us or should tell us the truth or listen to us? But then if I flip it on its head, it's like, okay, well then what am I do? What is my role here? Why am I even here? And another one of the things I really love doing is working with therapists who are going through their own mental health challenges, emotional challenges, life challenges, right? As we do. And then out of that comes the question for me around, why are you a therapist? Are you a therapist because you have the answers? Are you a therapist because you've healed everything in your life? Or are you a therapist because you're a witness, because you're a good listener, because you are curious and able to hear what is being said to you and then what's beneath that? that to me has nothing to do necessarily. I mean, it has some to do, but with your own answer finding healing process,
Mm-hmm.
it's your capacity to hold space for another human and step out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is easier said than done, right? I mean, certainly. And a lot of what really got me with this whole topic is, when I went to graduate school, I wanted to consume everything I could about trauma. And when it came to, being present and being vulnerable, I kind of thought I had that dialed in. I was kind of, older and, I've been there, done that. And I didn't get it. I was so naive. And it almost seemed to me like that was the easy part. And the hard part, the challenging part was gaining all this knowledge. And I thought that was going to be the key. And of course, it wasn't. But what you're saying is, I think, is so spot on. But talk about why you feel that's a challenge for a lot of people. I mean, and of course, you're not saying to disregard the knowledge and the expertise, but to be able to understand that there's so much more there with being able to be okay with not having the answer.
Yeah. For me, it's, I feel like it's a process of, it's a philosophical approach for sure of like, where do answers lie? And it is, what helps me, the freedom in that is continuing to learn. So if I weren't in a position of also often wanting to consume more information about trauma, the research that's happening, science around it, I think continuing to learn allows me to free up in the moment with someone like, okay, I know a bunch of shit. Sorry, I do swear a lot. I don't know if it's from being from New England or what. We just do that.
We've got a little island with lawless,
that irreverence.
Lawless part.
But I don't know if it is is sort of like, okay, I have this information and I don't know what's true for you. And you get to be it never felt right to me as a therapist, even as a yoga teacher, when I was first a yoga teacher, to come into a place of like, you need to adjust your body this way. Mm-hmm. I would be curious, like, okay, so you could move your shoulders like this, but what does that feel like to you? The same thing could be true for anything. It's like, okay, we could go toward this trigger, but you know your body better than I do. Or what is your body telling you right now as I'm bringing up the possibility of us leaning into this moment? You're getting a lot of like flashing lights in there. You're getting a lot of like signals. And we get to decide that together, because I know at some point we're going to want to face that, but that doesn't have to be now. The timing could be with another therapist, another year, but that you get to be the one that is in charge of when or how. It's like a informed consent along the way, like every step. And so I think that, so the idea that the thing that, I mean, not to get too deep in the weeds, but part of what I sort of feel like I've been studying with this medicine woman, an indigenous medicine woman, just to learn about like who often I think in an indigenous setting can serve as a therapeutic kind of role. And that work, from what I've understood so far, is centered in a relational piece, not so much a science piece. I think psychology has always had the thing around like, are we a science? Can we be a science? Are we an art? What is this, right? When we come at it from my perspective as an art form and intuitive practice rooted in knowledge and information, but like so much that we're picking up with one another, then that shifts from, I have the answers, let me teach you, to I'm sensing this. What's happening in you? Am I missing some? Then it becomes this reciprocal dance, which is the roots of therapy come from a different place. I think they come from a top-down academic research kind of place. Mm-hmm. In practice, they may not, but in our training, it's in the water.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes by Eugene Gendlin in The Primacy of Presence. And he talks about, the importance of being present, being real with someone, and how profoundly healing just that in and of itself it can be. But for me, it's like I feel it requires a certain honesty from the therapist to have done their work so that they're able to be there, to be so present in that moment at that time, especially when you're talking about people who've been impacted by trauma, when it's very difficult for them to trust or to even feel empowered, right? Or for even, as you're saying, you're trusting them to honor their own feelings, to even honor their own feelings.
Yes.
It becomes very difficult.
And sometimes that's the work for years, right? It's like to build that space of like, of establishing some kind of trust, establishing a relationship with self. It's like, if I don't think that I'm worthy of care, which we know is one of the outcomes of, early childhood trauma, if I don't believe I'm worthy of care or love or safety, then for sure, if my therapist comes in like, you've got the answers in there, I'm not going to stick around for that.
Right.
And so, yes, there are some things that I can share with you about, like knowledge that exists out there. Well, let's get access to that. But in terms of me telling you or being able to peer into your psyche or your spirit and tell you a thing, like that's very delicate work that you get to do only with, and you invite me into that each time, and you can always kick me out of that too.
So are you doing kind of research around this topic, or what's your interest in this topic?
Yeah. So the work that the entry point has been through the yoga model, which is a trauma sensitive yoga model. That's the one that we've done the most research on, working with, institutions like the VA, NIH to do these kinds of research projects. What has been out of that has come a desire for clinicians to say, okay, this is great to have group classes, but how do I do this in a one-on-one session? And so starting to experiment with that clinically and offer sessions where we're doing embodied work and then we're processing it, but we're staying close to the body and not necessarily going into the story or that like top down, I know a thing. We're having this shared authentic experience together. And so that to me is the next line of research and project that I would really like to do to research specifically the yoga model embedded in the context of traditional kind of one-on-one therapy. The work in general of examining the relationship is something we've done in all of our models, the weightlifting, the theater program, and the yoga program, in terms of what does it look like to have boundaries and be transparent? What does it look like to show up authentically and with presence and hold a container where you're not centering yourself, but also to show up fully as a human and as another body in the room. And that's invited us to look at some of these systems and structures of therapeutic care and wonder about what would we do differently if we were really wanting to make it trauma-informed and relational. So that's where a lot of this inquiry has come from.
From your perspective, do you see trends in terms of therapeutic treatment modalities for trauma? Do you see them moving more towards that? I mean, because as you said, this is somewhat a philosophical approach, but certainly a lot of people I've spoken with on this podcast put a lot of value in that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. I mean, one of the things that I have noticed is that as much as there's so much, because I live in the world of like the sensory world and the embodied world around trauma, there's a lot of energy around like focus and research and interest in how do we bring the body into care. And there's still this like missing link about the doing of that. Mm-hmm. One thing, so I noticed that as sort of a trend. And I don't know if it's just that that's a field that's continuing to grow. And so folks are still continuing to feel comfortable putting that into practice. But the relational piece and the power dynamics, to me, I also teach a graduate course at a university in Cambridge, and I feel like the power dynamics thing kind of blows people out of the water still. Even the students, they're like, wait, what? I have power over and this and that. And I'm like, I don't know if people are talking about that as much as I am talking about it, I guess. I don't know. I feel like I talk about it every day, but that to me,
because the students aren't aware of it. Like, what do you mean I have power?
They're not aware of it, or it's like, I think sometimes actually, particularly for fledgling and young therapists, the danger is that they don't think of themselves as experts, but to their clients who are walking in there, they're holding the keys.
Right.
And so sometimes I think the most harm we can do is when we don't actually claim the power we've been given. It's like our privilege, right?
Not aware of it.
Yeah. It's like, I don't have, I share my privilege. It's like, okay,
right.
let's really check that out,
Right.
And so I think that, I do really appreciate in being an educator and seeing and training folks and seeing the fluency in trauma has changed so much in the last 10 years. I feel like that has been incredible to witness. And so that permeates into care always, right? If we're getting to learn, ways to meet trauma that are different than they were 10 years ago, our clients are benefiting from that. That's happening in all kinds of spaces. And that to me is really exciting.
Very cool. All right, Jenn. So what's going on at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment? What are you offering there? What are you doing there?
Yeah, so we're growing, we're expanding. We're launching new training institutes where we're really looking to have synchronous and asynchronous training that's offered for a host of providers, not just therapists, but including therapists.
Wow.
In the weightlifting program, the yoga program, but also looking at other things that are adjacent to that, we have a large research project working in perinatal support of embodied care. And so that will be launching in the next 6 months at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment.org or CFTE.org. We're looking to launch a podcast as well that I am supposed to be hosting.
Awesome.
That's a whole thing that at a later date I'd love to pick your brain about. Just trying to continue the conversation around embodied care and trauma through training, through research, and through writing too, and a couple of new books that are going to be coming out as well.
What by whom?
So one that's coming out, we have a Spanish-speaking community that's been largely based in Central America. So they're going to they're in the process of writing a book, Cristal Perez and Luisa Perez, that are looking to launch a book around embodied care through yoga in Central America and the sort of cultural adaptations. We have a really interesting project happening in the Middle East right now in the refugee centers there, in Syria and Lebanon, training women that are living in those camps in offering embodied care and yoga to fellow refugees and children, particularly in a culture and context that is where claiming your agency and body as a female identifying person is quite challenging at times. So lots of interesting projects and learning that's happening. People, I'll leave the website in the bio and things, but people could check it out there.
Yeah. Wow. Exciting. Website is, would you say CFT?
CFTE.org.
CFTE.org. Okay. We'll have
and then traumasensitiveyoga.org is another good one.
Okay. We'll have those linked up at the show notes page here at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. Jenn, so inspiring talking to you. Really, you are like a breath of fresh air to speak with. I love it.
That's great. I love these conversations. They're thought-provoking.
Take care.
Thanks so much.